He blindsided me with a breakup, and now he wants $4,000 back. I was stunned, betrayed, and now utterly confused. Looking back, it all began so full of promise. We were together for over a year, each day a stepping stone toward what I believed was our shared future. We traveled, exploring new places and creating memories that I thought would last a lifetime. We whispered about marriage, children, and the kind of life we'd build together. I even uprooted my life, leaving behind familiar faces and places to move out of state and be with him. We were building something real, or so I thought. Those early days were filled with warmth and laughter. Yet, even then, small shadows loomed, casting doubt in the corners of my mind. There were moments when his affection felt as solid as a rock, only to crumble into dust without warning. One moment, he was all smiles, and the next, a storm would brew that left me walking on eggshells. I often wondered if I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew something was off. It was like living with a chameleon, never quite certain when the colors would change. Our relationship was a mix of joy and stress, the latter often stemming from his unpredictable shifts. I wasn't perfect. I had my moments, my struggles, especially in such a turbulent environment. But every time I questioned the relationship, I reminded myself of our good days and pushed the doubts aside. The first breakup came like a lightning bolt, sudden and dazzling in its intensity. It was over something trivial, a reaction to something he'd done. We patched things up, but I drew a clear boundary. I told him, if this happens again, that's it. He seemed to understand, nodding gravely, as if he too feared the finality of such an ultimatum. For a while, things were calm. But a few weeks ago, the storm returned. It started innocuously enough, a simple question about a social media video. His response was immediate and brutal, ending with a declaration I never expected to hear. You're unfit to be a mother. I was blindsided, my world suddenly upside down. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. How had we gone from love to this? My mind raced, heart pounding as I asked him for space, a week to clear my head and decide what to do next. He agreed and left for his family home, leaving me alone in the silence of our apartment. Those days were a blur of reflection and realization. I needed to leave. The decision was both simple and excruciating. When he returned, he found nothing but emptiness. I had packed my things, leaving behind the echoes of our life together. It was a clean break, yet it felt jagged, each edge cutting into me with doubts and guilt. Should I have stayed to explain? Could we have had one last conversation? But every attempt at dialogue had spiraled into chaos. It didn't feel safe. Reflecting on our relationship, I saw patterns that had been invisible to me before. His behavior had always bordered on manipulative. There was the prenup he presented, which my attorney later confirmed was legally unsound and skewed heavily in his favor. He made baseless accusations, calling me a gold digger, accusing me of secretly using birth control, and even alleging I'd had an abortion. In truth, I'd had a miscarriage. Each accusation was a strike against my character, designed to leave me questioning my worth. He criticized everything: my age, intelligence, friends, family, fertility, career, and finances. Even my birthdays were marred by his disregard, not a single card across 3 holidays despite knowing how much they meant to me. And all the while, I was dealing with a serious health issue, struggling to keep my head above water in a sea of emotional turmoil. Financially, we had a clear arrangement. He covered the apartment costs. I took care of household expenses. When we signed a lease on a new apartment in another state, he put down the deposit and the first month's rent. We never moved in, and the lease was settled with the real estate agent, who took a commission and returned $1,000 to him. He didn't have to move, didn't have to rearrange his life. He stayed where he was, and yet now he was requesting $4,000 from me. The Apple Cash request felt like a final slap in the face. It was money he had chosen to spend under an agreement that worked for us both, a relationship he had ended. I blocked him, seeking the peace I desperately needed, but the question lingered. Was I wrong for leaving the way I did? Should I pay him the $4,000? In the quiet moments, I replayed our last days together, trying to untangle the knots of guilt and reason. Every time, I came to the same conclusion. I had to leave, for my sanity, for my safety. And yet, a part of me still wonders if I did the right thing. In the end, I realized the truth was simple. Love should not feel like a battlefield. It should not leave you questioning your worth or fearing the next moment. As I move forward, I hold on to that clarity. Yet, the question that haunts me remains: how did love turn into this? As the days turned into nights, I found myself grappling with a torrent of emotions that threatened to engulf me. The silence of my new surroundings was deafening, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and whispered promises that used to fill my life. I had walked away, but in many ways I was still tethered to the past, replaying every moment with a clarity that was both enlightening and painful. I had left behind a life that was supposed to be ours, a future that had seemed so certain. The reality that had unfolded was a far cry from the dreams we had spun together on lazy Sunday mornings. I wondered if he was feeling the same void, or if his life had seamlessly continued in my absence. I doubted it. His request for money felt less like a financial concern and more like a desperate attempt to keep a hold over me, to keep the connection alive, even if it was through conflict. In the quiet, I began to unpack the layers of our time together, peeling back the good to reveal the ugly truths that had festered beneath the surface. His words, "You're unfit to be a mother," reverberated in my mind, leaving a wound that refused to heal. How quickly love had turned to cruelty, how swiftly the man I trusted had become a stranger. It was as if I had been living with a shadow, one that shifted and changed, leaving me to question what was real. I thought about the times he had accused me of things I had never done, the way he had chipped away at my confidence with each baseless accusation. He had a way of turning every argument into a reflection of my faults, leaving me to wonder if I was truly the flawed one. But now, with distance between us, I could see that his words were more a reflection of his insecurities than my shortcomings. There was something liberating about finally recognizing the cracks in our relationship, even if it took so long to see them. I had been so desperate to make things work, to build the future we had dreamed of, that I ignored the warning signs. But now, in the solitude of my new life, I could see clearly. I had been living in a house of cards, one that collapsed with the slightest breeze. Despite this clarity, the $4,000 loomed large in my mind. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. It was about standing up for myself, refusing to be manipulated any longer. Yet, a part of me wondered if this was just another battle in a war I had already won by walking away. Every time I toyed with the idea of paying him, I reminded myself of the agreement we had made. He had chosen to put down that money, just as he had chosen to end the relationship. I owed him nothing. Still, the guilt gnawed at me, a persistent whisper that maybe, just maybe, I was in the wrong. I reached out to friends, seeking their perspectives, hoping their voices would drown out the doubt that lingered. They were supportive, reminding me of the strength it took to leave, the courage it took to start anew. Their words were like lifelines, pulling me back from the edge of uncertainty. Yet, in the stillness, I realized that the answers I sought couldn't be found in the opinions of others. They lay within me, waiting to be acknowledged. I needed to trust myself, to believe that my decision was the right one, even if it left me questioning in the quiet hours of the night. As I navigated this new chapter, I held on to a single truth. I had chosen myself. I had chosen to break free from a cycle that threatened to consume me, to step into the unknown rather than remain in the familiar chaos. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, a leap of faith into a future that was now mine to shape. Every day was a step further from the past, a journey toward healing and self-discovery. I was learning to forgive myself for staying as long as I did, for ignoring the red flags that now seemed so glaringly obvious. It was a process, one that required patience and kindness, qualities I had long reserved for others but rarely extended to myself. The question of whether I was the asshole lingered, but it no longer consumed me. I had made my choice, and now it was time to live with it, to own it. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to walk. As I continued to unpack the remnants of our relationship, I found a strength I had forgotten I possessed. It was a flicker at first, but with each passing day, it grew brighter, illuminating the path forward. I realized that love should not leave you questioning your worth or fearing the future. It should be a source of strength, not a reason for tears. In choosing to leave, I had chosen to reclaim my life, to find peace in the absence of turmoil. And though the future was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I was finally free. The days continued to pass, each one bringing with it a newfound sense of freedom and apprehension in equal measure. It was strange, this feeling of having both feet in different worlds. One foot was planted firmly in the past, a place filled with familiar yet painful memories, and the other in an uncharted future that promised both hope and fear. I found solace in the little things, the quiet of the early mornings, the way the sun spilled across my new apartment floor, the freedom to choose how I spent my time without the constant need to tiptoe around someone else's mood swings. Yet, even as I embraced this new chapter, there was a part of me that remained unsettled, haunted by echoes of the life I had left behind. Every now and then, I would catch myself reaching for my phone, half expecting to see a message from him, an apology perhaps, or even another demand for the money, but there was nothing. Just the empty screen, a reminder of the silence that now defined our relationship. It was a silence I'd craved, yet it still left a hollow pit in my stomach. I busied myself with unpacking each box a time capsule of a life that felt more distant with every item I pulled out. As I carefully placed books on a shelf and hung pictures on the walls, I found myself reflecting on the woman I'd become. I was stronger now, more self-assured, but there were still moments when doubt crept in, whispering insidiously in the quiet of the night. The $4,000 request still lingered in my mind, a stubborn thorn that refused to be ignored. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. It was about the power dynamics that had always been skewed in his favor, the way he had wielded his financial stability as a weapon, subtly undermining my independence. I had to remind myself that this was no longer a battle I needed to fight. Yet, a small voice inside me questioned my resolve. Was I being stubborn, holding on to principles at the cost of peace? But then I would remember his accusations, the way he had belittled and demeaned me, and the resolve would return. I had been manipulated for too long, and I was determined not to allow it anymore. As the days turned into weeks, I started to find my rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, their laughter and warmth a balm to my soul. They reminded me of who I was before him, before the relationship had consumed so much of my identity. With them, I was free to be myself, unencumbered by the fear of judgment or criticism. I started to explore my new city, wandering through parks and cafes, rediscovering a zest for life that had been dulled by constant anxiety. Each step I took was a step away from the person I had been, towards the person I wanted to become. It was liberating, this sense of autonomy, the realization that I was in control of my own narrative. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the world go by, I allowed myself to dream of a future where my worth wasn't measured by someone else's perception, where love was a source of strength, not anguish. I imagined a life where I could be vulnerable without fear, where my dreams and aspirations were valued and supported, and in that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. By walking away, I had chosen to believe in myself, to trust that I was worthy of love and happiness. The road ahead might be uncertain, but it was mine to travel, and that was enough. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, I realized that I was no longer tethered to the past, no longer defined by a relationship that had left me questioning my value. I was free to explore the present, to shape my future, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I was finally home, within myself, and it was a place I intended to cherish. Yet, even as I settled into this newfound peace, the shadows of my past life occasionally crept in, uninvited and persistent. They came mostly at night when the world slowed down and the silence became a canvas for my thoughts. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from our relationship like scenes from a movie. The good times were there, of course. The laughter, the shared dreams, the tender moments that had once convinced me we were meant to be. But inevitably, the dark scenes followed, overshadowing the light with their intensity, the arguments, his cutting words, the constant feeling of inadequacy he had so expertly planted in me. Why had I stayed so long? This question haunted me, taunting me with its simplicity, yet eluding any satisfying answer. Was it love? Or was it merely the fear of being alone, of starting over when I had invested so much of myself into this relationship? I had to remind myself that leaving had been an act of courage, a declaration of self-worth that had been long overdue. In those quiet moments, I found myself grappling with the concept of forgiveness, not for him, at least not yet, but for myself. For the choices I had made, for the times I had silenced my own voice, for the moments I had allowed his words to define me. Forgiving myself was proving to be the hardest part of this journey. It was a dance of 2 steps forward, 1 step back as I learned to be gentle with the woman I had been, the one who had stayed when she should have walked away. I realized that I had to forgive that version of me to fully embrace the woman I was becoming. Amidst these reflections, the question of whether I should have handled the breakup differently often resurfaced. I would go over the scenario in my mind, imagining different outcomes. What if I had stayed for that final conversation? Would it have provided closure, or would it have spiraled into another one of those unrecognizable arguments? Deep down, I knew the answer. I had tried to communicate, to reach him, but he had always been adept at turning discussions into battlegrounds. The $4,000 demand was a manifestation of that same dynamic. It was his way of asserting control, of trying to pull me back into a web I had fought so hard to escape. Each time the thought of paying him back crossed my mind, I would remind myself of the larger picture, the emotional cost of staying, the mental toll of constantly walking on eggshells. And so, I held firm, refusing to engage with his demands, knowing that doing so would grant him power over me once more. It was not an easy decision, and there were days when I questioned whether my stance was too rigid, too unforgiving. But then I would remember the person I had been in that relationship, and the strength I had found in leaving. In moments of doubt, I would reach out to my friends, those steadfast pillars of support who had seen me through the darkest times. Their encouragement was a lifeline, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. They listened without judgment, offered advice when needed, and never failed to affirm my worth. Gradually, I learned to replace the echoes of his voice with my own. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper, giving form to the chaos within. Writing became a therapeutic exercise, a way to process the past and make sense of the tumultuous emotions that still lingered. Through words, I began to craft a narrative of resilience and hope. I wrote about the woman I aspired to be, strong, independent, unafraid to voice her needs and desires. I wrote about the kind of love I hoped to find one day, a love that was nurturing and kind, that lifted rather than diminished. These reflections became a roadmap guiding me through the labyrinth of healing. They were a reminder of the progress I had made, the steps I had taken to reclaim my life. And with each entry, I felt a little lighter, a little more free. As I continued to navigate this new chapter, I discovered a growing sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength I had found in the face of adversity, for the freedom to shape my own destiny. It was a powerful realization, one that filled me with a quiet confidence. I was no longer defined by the relationship that had once held me captive. I was charting my own course, building a life that was rich in meaning and purpose, and in doing so, I was finally discovering the woman I was meant to be. The days unfolded like pages of a book I was finally learning to read. Each moment was a chance to rewrite the narrative, to replace the haunting echoes of the past with the vibrant possibilities of the present. I began to see myself not just as a survivor of a tumultuous relationship, but as an architect of my own life. I was free to design a future that truly resonated with who I was and who I wanted to become. In the midst of this transformation, I found solace in the little things, simple joys that I had once overlooked or taken for granted. I would take long walks in the park, letting the rhythm of my footsteps ground me in reality. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, even the distant hum of city life, these sounds became a symphony of freedom, reminding me that I was alive and capable of finding beauty in the world. I found myself reconnecting with passions I had set aside during the relationship. I picked up painting again, letting colors flow freely on canvas, capturing emotions that words could not. Each stroke of the brush was a step toward reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried under layers of doubt and insecurity. It was as though the colors spoke to me, telling a story of renewal and hope. Socially, I began to branch out, rediscovering friendships that had languished during the relationship. I mended bridges, rekindled connections, and allowed myself to be vulnerable with those who truly cared about me. These relationships were a reminder that I was not alone, that love and support were all around me, waiting to be embraced. The journey was not without its challenges, of course. There were moments when the past would rear its head, when memories would hit me with an unexpected force, threatening to unravel the progress I had made, but each time I stood firm, determined not to let those ghosts dictate my present. I would remind myself of the courage it took to leave, the strength it took to choose myself over a relationship that had diminished my spirit. And then there was the matter of the $4,000 demand. It lingered in the background like a pesky specter, a reminder of the unresolved tension between us. I knew he saw it as leverage, a way to draw me back into his orbit. Yet, the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that money could not be the currency of closure. True closure came from within, from accepting my past and moving forward with grace. I reached a point where I could look back on the relationship with a kind of detached compassion. I recognized that we had both been flawed, both caught up in a cycle of unmet needs and unspoken fears. But I also understood that my responsibility ended where his choices began. I had given him a chance to meet me halfway, to understand my boundaries, and he had chosen otherwise. In the end, I found peace in knowing that I had honored my word. I had drawn a line and stood by it, refusing to let guilt or obligation dictate my actions. This was my life to live, my path to walk, and I was determined to do so with integrity and self-respect. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed a profound shift within me. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the strength it had forged in me. I was no longer waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I had found it within myself. And with this realization came a profound sense of liberation. I thought about the future, about the life I wanted to build, and for the first time, it felt like a blank canvas, a world of possibilities waiting to be explored. I was ready to embrace it all, the highs and lows, the joys and challenges, knowing that I had the resilience to navigate whatever came my way. Reflecting on everything, I understood that the journey was not just about leaving him, but about returning to myself. It was about finding peace in the chaos, clarity in the confusion, and ultimately, love in the places I had once feared to look. As I stood at the threshold of this new chapter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. It had been painful, yes, but also transformative, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And so, as I closed the door on this chapter of my life, a powerful question lingered in the air, inviting reflection and judgment. Was I wrong to choose freedom over his $4,000 demand?